The hardest thing I've ever done in my 71 years wasn't building my business from nothing. It wasn't burying my father when I was 23 or working 18-hour days to keep my company alive during the recession of 2008. It was helping my wife into my car while my own son stood at our front door and watched us leave like we were strangers. My name is Harold Whitmore. I'm 71 years old and live in Asheville, North Carolina. 46 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I've ever known, Margaret Whitmore. Margaret has spent her entire life taking care of everyone around her. She raised our son, Daniel, while working part-time as a school librarian. She spent 20 years volunteering at our local church's food pantry. She still remembers the birthdays of nearly every neighbor on our street. 3 years ago, she was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. If you've never watched someone you love struggle to button their own sweater after 40 years of doing it effortlessly, consider yourself blessed. Some days are harder than others. Some mornings I help her tie her shoes. Other mornings, she insists on making my coffee despite her trembling hands, spilling half the sugar onto the kitchen counter. And somehow she still apologizes whenever I help her. That's my wife, the woman my son called a waste of money. Daniel wasn't always like this. At least that's what I used to tell myself. When he lost nearly half his investments during a failed business venture 4 years ago, Margaret immediately suggested that he and his wife, Vanessa, move into our home temporarily. They're family, she told me. Families help each other. Temporary became 6 months. 6 months became 2 years. Then 2 years somehow became 3. Before we realized it, our son had slowly begun treating our home as though it belonged to him. He renovated the living room without asking us. He complained whenever Margaret's medical equipment occupied too much space. He began referring to the master bedroom as our room whenever speaking with friends. The truth is, Margaret noticed the changes long before I did. Mothers usually do. One evening, she quietly asked me something that still breaks my heart whenever I think about it. Do you ever feel like we're guests in our own house? I laughed at the time and told her she was imagining things. I was wrong. Everything finally came crashing down on a cold Thursday evening in October. Margaret had accidentally dropped one of her medication bottles in the kitchen while trying to prepare dinner. Vanessa immediately lost her patience. "This is getting ridiculous," she shouted. "Every single day it's something else." I walked into the kitchen just in time to hear Daniel say something that made my blood run cold. "Mom needs professional care, Dad. We can't keep living like this." We? The house belonged to Margaret and me. Our lives had suddenly become an inconvenience inside our own home. And unfortunately for me, that conversation was only the beginning. That conversation didn't end in the kitchen. It followed us into the living room like a storm that's been waiting years for permission to arrive. Margaret quietly picked up her medication bottle and apologized, even though she had done absolutely nothing wrong. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "My hands have been shaking more today." Vanessa laughed under her breath before saying something I will never forget. "That's exactly the problem, Margaret. Every day there's another problem." I looked at my wife sitting beside me on the couch. Her eyes were fixed on her hands. The same hands that held our son when he had a fever at 6 years old. The same hands that worked double shifts during Christmas seasons so Daniel could attend private school. And somehow those hands had become an inconvenience. Daniel sat across from us and folded his arms. "Dad, we're trying to have an honest conversation here." "Then let's be honest," I replied calmly. "Good," he said. "Mom's condition is getting worse, and frankly, neither of you can take care of yourselves anymore." "Neither of us?" I still played golf twice a week and managed several investment properties without assistance. But apparently 71 had become ancient overnight. Vanessa immediately jumped in. "Do you know how exhausting this is for me? Every time I invite my friends over, I have to explain why there's medical equipment in the dining room. I can't spend the next 10 years taking care of a sick old lady." Margaret's shoulders immediately dropped. That hurt me more than anything else she could have said, because my wife had spent 46 years taking care of other people without ever asking for anything in return. Then Daniel looked directly at me. "You need to start thinking practically, Dad." "I'm listening." "I've already spoken with 2 assisted living facilities." The room immediately went silent. "You what?" "They're actually very nice places," he continued. "You'd have nurses 24 hours a day. Mom would receive professional care." Professional care that costs nearly $8,000 a month, I replied. He smiled. That's why selling this house makes the most sense. There it was. Not concern, not love, real estate. I suddenly understood why he had spent the last 3 years renovating rooms that didn't belong to him. Why he had insisted on handling our mail. Why he constantly talked about property values in our neighborhood. He wasn't worried about Margaret's health. He was calculating square footage. Then Vanessa stood up and pointed directly at my wife. Look at her, Harold. She's a useless old woman who can't even hold her medication bottle anymore. The room became painfully silent. Margaret immediately began crying. Daniel didn't defend his mother. Instead, he nodded in agreement. Dad, she's right. You're both wasting money that could actually benefit your family. Your family. Apparently, after 46 years of marriage and raising the man sitting in front of me, Margaret and I no longer qualified as family. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Daniel walked to the front door, opened it, and said, If you're not willing to do what's best for everyone, then maybe it's time for you both to leave. I stared at him in complete disbelief. Excuse me? You heard me. Vanessa and I can't keep sacrificing our lives because of your poor decisions. Margaret quietly wiped the tears from her face. I don't want to be a burden anymore, she whispered. My heart broke hearing those words, because good people always believe they're burdens, whenever selfish people convince them they are. I helped her stand up and grabbed her coat from the hallway closet. Harold, she whispered, where are we going? Somewhere we'll be welcomed. Daniel looked almost relieved. That's probably for the best. I smiled softly. For the first time in 46 years of marriage, I realized my wife deserved far better than the family we had sacrificed so much to build. Now let me ask all of you something. If your own child called your sick spouse a burden and asked both of you to leave your home, would you ever forgive them? Comment never if some betrayals cannot be forgiven, or comment I would forgive if you believe children always deserve a second chance. Before leaving, I stopped beside the family portrait hanging in our hallway. Margaret was smiling in the photograph while holding Daniel on her lap when he was 8 years old. Funny how children forget who carried them when they were too small to walk. I helped my wife into our car and quietly drove away. She cried almost the entire drive. Did we fail him? She finally asked. That question broke me. No, sweetheart, I said softly while reaching for her hand. We simply loved him more than he deserved. What Daniel didn't know was that I wasn't worried about where we would sleep that night, because there was one thing he had forgotten. For 3 years he had lived inside our house. He never once asked how we actually owned it, and he certainly had no idea where I kept the documents that would completely change his life the very next morning. That night, Margaret and I checked into a small boutique hotel overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. For the first time in hours, she smiled when I ordered her favorite chamomile tea. Harold, she asked quietly, what are we going to do? I smiled and squeezed her hand. Exactly what we've always done, sweetheart. We're going to take care of each other. The next morning I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my family attorney. The second was to the trustee managing the Whitmore Family Trust. And the third was to a locksmith. By 10 o'clock, I was standing in my driveway with my attorney beside me, and a folder containing documents that had remained untouched for nearly 30 years. Daniel opened the front door wearing my bathrobe. So ironically, it suited him perfectly, comfortable in something that never belonged to him. I knew you'd come back, he said confidently. Ready to discuss selling the house? No, I replied calmly. I'm here to discuss your eviction. He laughed. Then my attorney handed him a copy of the trust agreement. You see, my grandfather established the Whitmore Family Trust in 1994 with one very unusual clause. Any beneficiary who intentionally abandons, mistreats or financially exploits his elderly parents immediately forfeits all inheritance rights under this trust. The house, 7 rental properties, the investment portfolio, our family business shares, everything was held inside that trust. Daniel wasn't an owner. He was merely a beneficiary, one who had permanently disqualified himself less than 24 hours earlier. His face immediately lost all color. That can't be legal. It's been legal for 30 years, my attorney replied. Vanessa stood frozen in the hallway. But this house was supposed to be ours, she shouted. I smiled sadly. No, Vanessa. This house was supposed to belong to people who understood the value of family. The locksmith quietly began changing the locks, while movers carried their belongings to the driveway. Before leaving, Daniel finally asked the question I knew was coming. "Are you really choosing money over your own son?" I looked at Margaret sitting peacefully in our car. "No, son, I chose my wife. 46 years ago, she promised to stand beside me in sickness and in health. Yesterday, I made the same promise all over again. Because if someone ever asks me who deserves my loyalty, the answer will never be the person who asked me to abandon the woman who gave me everything."